everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. I am pumped about this one, okay? As you saw by the title, we're going to be talking about book recommendations inspired by the Tortured Poets Department. Now, if you didn't know, I put out a 2-hour long video essay decoding the entire Tortured Poets Department from my perspective as a 1975 fan, and it kind of blew up a little bit. My goal has always been to be at the intersection of books and Taylor Swift on YouTube. And here we are, okay? So in today's video, I'm going to be going over 5 books that I have already read that I do recommend to you if you enjoy the Tortured Poets Department. And then probably about like 7 books that I am interested in reading that give Tortured Poets Department vibes. So I decided to pick these books based off of the themes of the album. Themes of depression, themes of feeling like you're in an asylum, feeling like you're going crazy, feeling like you're being experimented on, just that feeling of like internal helplessness that Taylor seems to continually repeat throughout the album. Themes of this like tumultuous relationship she had with the muse of Tortured Poets Department, Maddie Healy. The themes of kind of like this tortured soul or tortured poet, that kind of a vibe. Also then kind of the theme of like a scorned woman. I feel like that is a big theme throughout the album as well. And I feel like I found some really good book recommendations for that. So those are the themes that I'm basing these book recommendations off of. And I'm going to be talking about those themes and how they relate to the books that I'm recommending to you throughout the video. So let's get started. Also, I did buy the cardigan for Tortured Poets Department and I kind of like love it. I like look like a little English teacher right now. It's like super cute. Okay, so we're gonna be starting off with the books that I have previously read and I really do feel like match up with the Tortured Poets Department album themes in general. The first book, if you had watched my May TBR, I'm gonna leave it linked down below. I do want to read this book in May as well, so I have already talked about it. But that is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I continuously come back to this book year after year after year. This is a masterpiece, okay? And if you have never read it before, I would highly encourage you to read it. The reason why I feel like this book really reflects the themes of the Tortured Poets Department is because this book is about these 2 characters, Marianne and Connell. They start off with a relationship when they are very young in high school. They come from 2 very different social circles. Marianne is quite shy, she's quite reserved, she doesn't have a lot of friends. And then Connell is like the really popular kid on the sports teams, knows everyone, really just like the really popular like golden boy in the school. And they end up forming kind of like this like secret relationship when they're in high school that never actually like pans into a relationship, but like they kind of have this like connection, right? And you follow them as they go throughout high school, as they go throughout college, and into their young adulthood as they continue to float in and out of each other's lives, okay? I feel like this truly matches up with the theme of her and her muse of Tortured Poets Department continuously coming in and out of each other's lives. Especially, I feel like you really feel it on Chloe, Sam, or Sophia, or Marcus. Again, this is just my interpretation, but like she's had this relationship with Maddie Healy over a decade. And in that song specifically, you see them like coming in and out of each other's lives, you know, times when they're great with each other, times when they can't be together, or times that are really difficult, or they don't talk to each other. It's not even a situationship. It is a relationship, but like they can't actually like have a full form like boyfriend, girlfriend, actual committed relationship with each other. It's just this like floating in each other's orbits type of situation. You know what I mean? And that is what this book is. This book really has no plot. It's all character, but it's the most beautiful book. The quotes in this book are stunning and incredible. And if you have been interested in reading this book, or maybe you tried it and didn't like it, try giving the show a watch, because honestly, the show is so good. I am normally not one to say that a show does better than the book, but like honestly, the way that the show portrayed this book takes the book to an entirely new level. It is so beautiful. You will bawl your eyes out. I think about it and my soul like collapses in the saddest but like most beautiful way possible. And 5 stars, unreal. One of my favorite books of all time. Please give it a try if you haven't yet. So next 2 books I'm going to be talking about really are the theme of the scorned woman, okay? Really giving Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, and just kind of like this like scorned woman who is just upset with the circumstances of her life and is just feeling very angry, or almost just like this like animal who's ready to like bite at any instant. I really feel like that is a theme of Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. It almost just feel like Taylor is ready to just like snatch or like bite at someone who comes at her. I have 2 books for this I guess, song in particular, or this theme in particular. The first one is Circe by Madeline Miller. The way that this like has reflected the lighting in a bad way, I'm just gonna have to hold it like this because otherwise the camera does not register the lighting properly. Okay, so Circe is a Greek myth retelling, if you were unaware, about this. She's not like a woman, but she's not a god. She actually is a witch. Because she is a witch, Zeus feels threatened by her and ends up exiling her to this little island, and she has to live her life on this island like in complete isolation. She kind of turns into this myth where like people are afraid of going to her island or anything because they're scared that she's gonna curse them and stuff. But like it very much gives the vibe Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. She's literally this woman who has been exiled to this island, and people are afraid of coming up to her because they're scared that she's gonna curse them. This book is very beautiful. I feel like it will make you cry. I know this book is not for everyone. Like I know there's been a lot of people who I've talked to who have tried to read it and couldn't get into it or didn't really enjoy it, but I really, really feel like this gives the vibes of I am upset with my life. I'm a caged animal ready to bite at any instance. And I did cry in this book. I do feel like the ending was really great. I haven't read this book in a really long time, but I really, really feel like if you are interested, especially in like Greek myth retellings, and you are interested in kind of like that scorned woman theme that Taylor is talking about a little bit more, Circe would be an incredible option. And also Madeline Miller's writing is unparalleled. It is beautiful. And I love the Greek myth retellings she does. I heard she's coming up with another one too recently too. So I'm very interested, and I would totally recommend this if you are interested in this book. Okay, so next one, kind of still in the theme of scorned woman, of anger, of mad woman, of like that kind of stuff. This book recommendation is for my fantasy girlies, okay? I have seen people going around talking about how this book relates to Taylor Swift's album, and I am actually obsessed with the comparison, okay? And that is Throne of Glass. If you haven't read Throne of Glass, what are you doing with your life? I should also be saying that to myself because I still haven't finished the series. I have read the first 4 in this series, and they are incredible. Throne of Glass is a fantasy series with kind of like a light fantasy romance element to it by Sarah J. Maas. It's kind of like a new adult or young adult book or book series, but you're following our main character, Selena Sardathian, who is an assassin. This book, it follows her when she's like 17 years old, and she has continuously been trained her whole life just to snap, okay? She has a temper. She has vengeance that she wants to make right in her world, and she's just kind of like out for revenge throughout this whole series. She has been literally caged and like completely controlled by her assassin lord her entire young adult life. And this entire series is her escaping from that, and she is ready for the prowl. She is ready to take back what is hers, and this book series is honestly incredible, okay? Please read it if you are a fantasy romance reader or fantasy reader and you haven't given it a try yet. And if you are kind of interested in that like vengeance, like scorned woman, just like almost like female rage kind of empowerment, I would highly recommend this book. I really think that this is a fantastic comparison for Torture to Poets Department, and I just love that it's a fantasy recommendation, okay? You don't often get fantasy recommendations in these kind of book recommendations videos, so absolutely 100% read it if you haven't read it already. Next 2 book recommendations I have are actually by the same author, and I feel like these are like kind of cliche book recommendations, but they seriously ring so true in the context of this album, okay? The first book that I'm going to recommend is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Sorry about my copy, okay? I loaned it to my mom and her dog destroyed the dust jacket. It's honestly a crime. Love you, Mom, but really sad about it. The reason why I'm recommending this book in the context of this album is because when you open up the Taylor Swift album, there is a poem which was written by Stevie Nicks, okay? Stevie Nicks was the lead singer in the band Fleetwood Mac, which was a band that was hugely popular in the 70s, who has this magnum opus of an album called Rumors. If you did not know, Stevie Nicks and her lead guitarist of the band, Lindsey Buckingham, had this extremely tumultuous, toxic relationship, okay? They like cheated on each other with other people in the band, and then they would write songs about the other person and make that person sing that song about them. It's literally crazy, but like the best like drama of a band ever. And Daisy Jones and the Six is loosely based off of this, okay? The reason why Fleetwood Mac is important is because Stevie Nicks, in that poem she wrote to Taylor Swift that was put in the album, she said, "To T and me." She is basically saying that her and Maddie Healy, or her and the muse of the Tortured Poets department, are equivalent to Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. Honestly, mind-blowing when you think of it. I could keep going on for hours. We haven't even gotten to the Silver Springs of it all, but like, that's all you need to know, okay? That's what I'm trying to convey. Daisy Jones and the Six is loosely based off of Fleetwood Mac, okay? It's that kind of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll type of relationship. It is about a band called Daisy Jones and the Six, and the lead singer, Daisy, gets paired up with this band called The Six, whose lead guitarist and lead singer is named Billy. Daisy and Billy have this tension-filled relationship where they cannot be together, but they write music about each other. You just feel this like tension, this pulling towards each other throughout the entire book. But Billy is married with a child with his wife, Camilla. Makes for some incredible music. It is such an incredible book, and it is loosely based off of Fleetwood Mac. And Taylor Swift is equating her relationship with the muse of Tortured Poets with Fleetwood Mac. Okay, I hope I made all the connections there. It honestly is mind-blowing when you think about it. It is so incredible how Taylor Swift does all of these connections, and like, she's literally a mastermind. I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to read this book or watch the show if you haven't read it already. One of my favorite books of all time. There's literally no other books like this. I have tried to find other books like this, but like, this is the only one, and praise to the heavens. Okay, Taylor Jenkins Reid, praise to the heavens. The next book recommendation I'm going to be giving you is by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and that is Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I feel like this book really conveys the Clara Bow of the album, the discussion about the turnover of fame and the turnover of this like bright new shining starlet actress who has an incredible career but then just ends up getting replaced with someone else. It's like the Clara Bow, the nothing new, that kind of vibe, I feel like is really well portrayed in Evelyn Hugo, okay? I don't know. I just feel like The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is an incredible, incredible book. One of my favorite books of all time, honestly. And I feel like this book really does do the comparison of that kind of like rise of fame and then kind of like this cycle that Hollywood has where they're just constantly looking for someone new or constantly looking for the next Stevie Nicks, the next Taylor Swift, the next whoever, Clara Bow, you know? This book follows our main character, Evelyn Hugo. It's literally her autobiography. She's basically this like huge movie star in like the 60s, like 50s or 60s, and someone is writing a biography about her. So she's kind of detailing her entire life. It is so beautiful. You get that like old Hollywood glam like style of historical fiction in this. It's great. It's incredible. The writing's incredible. The story's incredible. Like, everything is so incredible about this book, and I would highly recommend it if you haven't already. Okay, so the next part of this video is going to be books that I actually haven't read yet, but I'm interested in reading, but I do feel like give very, very great comparisons to the Tortured Poets department as well, okay? The first few books that I'm going to be talking about are poetry books, because I feel like you can't talk about Tortured Poets department book recommendations without talking about poetry. Like, it's in the title. You need to have some type of poetry recommendation in this list. Otherwise, it just doesn't feel right, you know? First book that I would like to read personally, and I feel like will actually explain a lot of the Taylor Swift lore in general, is The Complete Poems of Emily Dickinson. I gotta be honest with you, I am not a poetry person, like, at all. I feel like I could be, but I just haven't tried it yet. And I feel like Emily Dickinson, just in general, has been constantly in Taylor Swift like universe, okay? I feel like she has been compared to Emily Dickinson quite a bit, and just in general, Emily Dickinson is like one of the most influential and well-known poets like of our time. And I feel like as a Taylor Swift fan who also loves to read, I feel like I'm just doing a disservice to myself in having not read these poems yet. I feel like they will explain a lot about Taylor Swift, and I feel like they will explain a lot about folklore and like kind of her I hate it here type of mindset, where she doesn't actually want to be in the real world and she wants to be up in her mind, like the lakes and like, yeah, I hate it here and like all that kind of stuff. I just feel like reading The Complete Poems of Emily Dickinson will honestly explain her mindset a lot more, and like maybe just like get an understanding of Taylor Swift as a whole, because I feel like she really enjoys to Emily Dickinson, and she's been compared to Emily Dickinson like quite a lot throughout her career. So it is known that Emily Dickinson like did not release a lot of these poems when she was alive. It was actually her younger sister who found a lot of her poems and then published them after she had died. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know. I am just very, very interested in Emily Dickinson in general. And again, I don't know much about her poems at all, but I feel like just the way that she has been compared to Taylor Swift and the way that Taylor Swift has discussed her love for Emily Dickinson in general, I feel like is an absolute must on the Tortured Poets department. We're talking about poetry, and Emily Dickinson is completely within the Taylor Swift lore. So that one is one I actually want to get to, hopefully pretty soon. The next poetry collection that I feel like is very important to recommend in this video, and is literally called out in the album, so you have to put it in here, is Just Kids by Patti Smith. Patti Smith is literally name dropped in the Tortured Poets department song, and her poetry collection called Just Kids, which there's also a lyric, "We were just kids, babe." Like, I don't know if you can draw that comparison there, but like I am. This is a poetry collection from Patti Smith all about her relationship with the photographer Robert Mapplethorpe in New York City at the Chelsea Hotel. It's set in the late 60s and 70s, and I feel like it will explain kind of like that tortured poet aesthetic that Taylor Swift was alluding to a lot throughout this album, of how her and her muse are these tortured souls, these tortured poets. And I feel like Patti Smith and her relationship with this photographer, it's also that same kind of idea, you know? Like I said, have not read this yet, but I feel like to understand the Tortured Poets department, this may be required reading. We'll report back if I read it, okay? But I feel like this is a really important one in these literal direct references from the album. The next book that I'm going to be talking about also accompanies a poetry collection, okay? The book that I'm going to be talking about is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, but then he also released a poetry collection called Time is a Mother after this, which the themes are similar in these two novels, okay? And the whole concept of this book is that this is a letter to his mother. This book has a lot of discussion about heavy topics like race, class, and then also like trauma and mental health and like, what else did they say? Addiction and violence and stuff like that. But the reason I want to read this book is because this gives kind of the setup for that Time is a Mother poetry collection that Ocean Vuong wrote, in where he is contemplating these feelings of grief and his determination to kind of be able to overcome the grief he is experiencing. The reason why I'm interested in reading these two books is because, number one, this poetry collection is a little bit more accessible. It was published in 2022, so it's going to be a little bit hopefully easier for me to read than maybe Emily Dickinson's poetry. But not only that, but Time is a Mother contemplates a lot of the ideas about grief and trying to survive beyond grief. And the whole Tortured Poets department album really talks about her trying to move past this relationship that she has built up in her head that has completely not turned out the way she wanted to, and she's kind of grieving that relationship throughout the entire album. I feel like the comparison of grief and kind of like depression are very relevant in these two books by Ocean Vuong. It's not necessarily a super direct reference to Tortured Poets department, but I guess it conveys that feeling of grief and despair and trying to like move past these very difficult emotions that one experiences throughout their life. I also think that this kinds of gives a little bit more of a nuance into modern day issues with like race, class, trauma, kind of like I was saying before. So like I said, hopefully these will be a little bit more accessible poetry collections in order for me to be able to get into poetry, or you to be able to get into poetry. So I'm hoping to start there, and these are very short books, by the way, too, so it shouldn't take too long to get through these. The next book I would like to read is actually a book that I also talked about in my May TBR, and that is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. The way that Sylvia Plath's name has been circulating throughout the Tortured Poets department, like lore, I guess, and the way that Taylor Swift has been compared to Sylvia Plath time and time and time again, I saw it so much in the comments of my video. I keep seeing it in people's blog blog posts about how Sylvia Plath is being compared to Taylor Swift, or Taylor Swift is being compared to her, and how the comparison in this album is very, very stark and glaring. So The Bell Jar was written by Sylvia Plath, and it is about this woman named Esther who has risen to the top of her career. I'm not sure what she has risen to the top of, whether that's like acting or music or something, but she is a very successful woman, okay? And she goes crazy. Like, the book is about like the inner workings of her psyche as she is like in an asylum in her own mind. And if this is not like the most Tortured Poets Department like comparison there is in this whole video, I don't know what is. Like, there is continued themes of like going crazy in your own mind, and like this feeling like you're in an asylum when you become this really famous figure that Taylor Swift continues to talk about throughout the album time and time and time again. I'm very, very interested in reading this book, and I know this is more of like a classic literature, but it sounds like not only has The Bell Jar kind of been compared to the feelings that Taylor Swift conveys in the Tortured Poets Department, but also much more of Sylvia Plath's work has been as well. And I am very interested to see what I think about this book, and whether or not I will want to continue reading more of Sylvia Plath's work to see if like, just honestly out of curiosity, because Taylor Swift, I feel like she tends to reference a lot of these more like classical pieces of literature. And this is one that has been a direct reference and direct comparison. And if I'm not mistaken, I feel like Taylor Swift has even talked about this. I don't know, maybe like in an interview or something, but I feel like I've seen it somewhere where she has talked about Sylvia Plath's work, and maybe this like will help make a lot more sense once I actually read this book. And I feel like this is like kind of required reading, and Taylor Swift is like very much alluding to try and read this book to try and understand her mindset. Does that make sense? I feel like, again, doing a disservice to myself by not reading this book in order to understand the album. The next book that I'm going to be talking about in relation to the Tortured Poets Department is On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Now, the reason I'm talking about this book is because throughout the Tortured Poets Department, they continue to come back to the tortured soul, the tortured artist idea. Like, it literally is called the tortured poet, okay? And if you didn't watch my video, the way that I compared Maddie Healy to the tortured poet is very stark, okay, and glaring. And Maddie Healy has been compared to Jack Kerouac many a time, okay? If you don't know who Jack Kerouac is, he wrote this book called On the Road back in like the 1960s or 1950s, 1960s. And this book basically defined the Beat generation, or the post-World War II era or generation of people, okay? The Beat generation is this like post-World War II generation whose people of this generation are exploring life with this drug use, poetry, jazz, music, rock and roll type of people, okay? It really is the tortured artist that Taylor Swift is talking about, okay? In like the post-World War II era, I'm really not a historian at all, but it feels like people needed like an outlet, or like they needed like some way to like cope with all of the trauma from the war. Okay, I am not a historian, okay? I am just like saying like what I am just thinking in my brain, okay? But like they needed a way to like cope with this stuff, and they turned to kind of the arts to be able to explore that kind of way of life. So On the Road kind of explores that type of lifestyle, right? Jack Kerouac is on the road with his friends, and he's kind of just exploring that nomadic, I guess, way of life, but more of an artistic way, okay? Not like a nomad like you would think of one today, but just more of like indulging into the drug use, indulging into the arts, indulging into music, and just kind of like really embodying that tortured artist idea, okay? I really feel like reading this book may actually explain kind of like Maddie Healy a little bit better, or just the idea or persona behind that tortured soul. The way that I'm a little nervous to read about this book, because I'm sure that there are themes of racism and sexism and stuff in it, doesn't excite me a whole lot, but I'm hoping that the overall theme of that like artistic soul will really come through with this book. And I think that this would be a very, very interesting book to accompany the Tortured Poets Department album in general. Next book I'm going to talk about kind of similar to what I was just talking about with that like tortured artist phenomenon, but in a little bit different of a way. This book is Slow Days, Fast Company by Eve Babbitt. I have been wanting to read this book for so long. And this book kind of deals more of a little bit of like the glitz and glamour kind of way of Hollywood. Eve Babbitt was a like socialite in the really old Hollywood kind of timeline. And this book details Eve Babbitt's experiences as she discusses these really lavish, like overdone parties at chateaus and like drug use and like binges and benders and like all of that kind of like old Hollywood, again, going back to this beat generation, these people who are very into music and almost like this escapist kind of culture and persona. This is not so much that nomadic style that I was talking about with Jack Kerouac. This is very much like a glitz and glam kind of style, but like still kind of along those lines of like they are just trying to escape their minds and their bodies. I feel like this gives the same themes of the tortured soul, but in a little bit of a different way, and maybe a little bit more of a lavish way where they're, you know, they have money at their disposal and they are really using it to their highest extent. I have been interested in reading this book for so long, and I feel like, again, this accompanies that tortured artist phenomenon very well, similar to what Taylor Swift was talking about through that entire album, but just in kind of like the glitz and glamour kind of way. All right, next book that I think would be a fantastic accompaniment to the Tortured Poets Department, and I still, again, haven't read this book yet, but like this book gives tortured poets, is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. I've talked about this book before in terms of Taylor Swift as well, and I feel like this book is even more relevant now that the Tortured Poets Department is out. So let me just read you the first two sentences on the back of this book. Our narrator should be happy, shouldn't she? She's young, thin, pretty, recent Columbia graduate, works an easy job at a hip art gallery, lives in a really nice apartment in Manhattan, but there is a hole in her heart, and it isn't just the loss of her parents or the way her boyfriend treats her. It's the year 2000 in a city with wealth and possibility. What could be so terribly wrong? Now, this book has a very strong theme of depression, okay? Literally what I just talked to you about was this girl is depressed. She has all of these things in her life, yet she still feels this gaping hole in her heart. For what reason? I feel like Taylor Swift, obviously she talks about how I'm so depressed, I act like it's my birthday every day. Like, this is, I can do it with a broken heart. She talks a lot about on the album about her depression and how, you know, it seems like she has this glitz and glamour of everything you could ever want. She's so happy, isn't she? No, she's internally dying inside. And I feel like My Year of Rest and Relaxation very much give those themes as well of, I should be happy, shouldn't I? I have everything I should want, shouldn't I? But why do I have this gaping hole in my heart? Why do I feel sad every single time I wake up? Why do I feel like I'm still missing something? Like, what's wrong? Why are my feelings not matching up with my life? And I feel like I've heard this book gives a really great discussion on depression in general, which Taylor Swift talks about at length, okay? And the last book that I think is a really great recommendation for the Tortured Poets Department is Florida by Lauren Groff. Now, I think Florence and the Machine actually specifically called this book out to accompany the song Florida. I think that song was written with this book in mind, and I feel like this is an absolute must to have on this list. So the premise behind this book is it sounds like it's a collection of stories all about these characters and towns and people in Florida. Reading the synopsis of this book very much defines the heaviness, the energy, the chaos that the song Florida gives. This book is stated to talk about loneliness, rage, family, and the passing of time within this like really hot and human environment where things seem to just kind of blow up. This book seems to talk about the gamut of human emotion in talking about anger and love and passion and pain and like every kind of like strong emotion you could feel. It appears this book discusses, okay? I feel like the song Florida really emotes that energy that Taylor Swift is trying to convey when she talks about Florida, of how it's just this like escapist place where you need to go, but also at the same time, your life is just like bubbling over with toxicity, or you're trying to escape from something, you're trying to run away from something, you're trying to escape your life and go to Florida where this state just seems to like bubble up with incredible stories, where it's like you have the swamps and the humidity and the gators and the heat. It's giving Tiger King. Like, I don't... This book just really feels like it is conveying the sentiment that Taylor Swift and Florence and the Machine are putting into the song Florida. And I really think that this is a great book recommendation and has also been recommended by the artists themselves. So it's got to go in the list, you know? All right, so that concludes my video for the book recommendations for the Tortured Poets Department. If you have any other book recommendations that you feel like would accompany the Tortured Poets Department really well, please leave them in the comments below. I am always so excited to talk about books, and especially this intersection of books and Taylor Swift. This is like exactly where I've always wanted to be, and so I would love to discuss with you more in the comments about books that fit this album. If you've made it this far in the video, leave a black and white heart for the Tortured Poets Department, and I will see you guys in my next video. Peace and love, everyone. Bye!